Shalom and welcome to the Ministry of Yeshua. I'm glad that you're here to learn with us. Today we're diving into this week's portion, which is called Yitro. We're going to explore its wisdom, its beauty, and we'll see how it speaks to our lives right now. Together we'll look at passages from Exodus 18:1 through 20:23, which will connect us to Isaiah 6 through 7:6, and Matthew 19:16 through 26. Let's take a look at the Torah portion summary. Rumors about the miracles and the great deliverance that God performed for Israel reached the ears of Moses' father-in-law in Midian. He travels out to the camp of Israel at Sinai to meet Moses. He brings with him Moses' wife and his 2 sons. When Jethro sees how Moses is daily overwhelmed by the court cases and legal questions, he advises him to establish a system of judges under him to assist. In the 3rd month, the children of Israel encamp at Mount Sinai. God speaks to Moses and tells him to deliver a message to the children of Israel. He wants to take them as his people, his own treasured possession, and he says he will do so if they will agree to obey him and keep his covenant. He will make them a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The people respond by proclaiming, "All that God has spoken, we shall do." Now the Lord tells Moses to set apart the entire mountain as a holy place. Moses cordons off the mountain and instructs the people to prepare for a revelation by undergoing a ritual purification and maintaining a state of Levitical purity. On the 3rd day, the people assemble while God descends upon the mountain with a fanfare of shofar blasts, thunder, lightning, and a billowing smoke. From atop the mountain he speaks the 10 commandments. Believe in God, have no other gods, do not take his name in vain, remember the Sabbath, honor parents, do not commit murder, adultery, or theft, do not bear false witnesses, and do not covet. All the people see the voice of God as a blazing fire, and they tremble and draw back. Overwhelmed with fear, they cry out to Moses, asking him to intercede and speak on God's behalf in the future, lest they die. The Lord consents to their request. So what is Yitro? The 17th reading from the Torah is named Yitro, which is the literal Hebrew behind the name Jethro. The title comes from the first words of the first verse of the reading, which says, "Now Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel his people." Exodus 18:1. The portion tells the story of Jethro's visit to the camp of Israel, then relates the great theophany at Mount Sinai, where God gives Israel the 10 commandments and invites the people to enter a special covenant relationship with him. And we'll talk about the testimony to Jethro. Jethro rejoiced over all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the hand of Egyptians. Exodus 18:9. Now when Moses and the children of Israel went out from Egypt, news of the events reached Moses' family in Midian. His father-in-law Jethro set out to meet Moses and the hosts of Israel in the wilderness. Moses told Jethro everything that had happened to them. Now the Lord had delivered them again and again. Jethro rejoiced and declared, "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods." Exodus 18:1. Sorry, that was 18:11, I believe. Prior to that moment, Jethro had not been a believer. He was a pagan priest. The testimony of Moses changed his life. He forsook other gods and turned to the one true living God. This is the power of testimony, telling how God changed your life. We all have stories about what God has done for us, how He transformed us, rescued us, and delivered us. Our personal stories of encounters with the living God can be a powerful tool in bringing others into the kingdom. As we reach out to the world, we should be ready to share our stories with those who are still searching. Moses was ready to tell his story to his father-in-law. As we look toward the task of introducing others to discipleship, family is a good place to start. Testimony is powerful. It is an anecdotal, but in the war of evangelism, it is the most powerful tool we have. After all, faith in God is not attained through rational and dispassionate argumentation. Our faith is relational. It is about a relationship. The only way of conveying a sense of personal relationship is by telling about our own subjective experience. You can't argue someone into a relationship with persuasive words or tricky formulaic pitches. All you can do is say, look, this is how I know God. This is how I have experienced Him, and this is what He has done for me. And then tell your story. Some people who grew up in faith-based homes feel that because they do not have a dramatic conversion story, their testimony will be less effective in drawing others to the Lord. And this is not the case. You can say something like this: I grew up in a religious home. I always had a sense of God. I was blessed to be raised by godly parents, but I didn't take God for granted. Here's how He persuaded me. Let me tell you about when I got serious with God. This is what happened. Everyone has a story to tell, and that includes you. The appointment of the judges. Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands and hundreds, of fifties and of tens. Exodus 18:21. Jethro advised Moses in adjudicating over the multitudes of Israel. He saw that it was too much for one man. He advised Moses to appoint judges under him who could help carry the load of leadership. And for the comments on the appointment of judges in Exodus 18:13 through 27, we're going to talk about it in Deuteronomy 1:12 through 17. Then there is a special treasure. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. Exodus 19:5. In Exodus 6:7, the Lord told the children of Israel, I will take you for my people and I will be your God. In the comments on that passage, we notice that this phrase adopted an expression from the sphere of marriage. The ancient Near Eastern wedding formulation was, you will be my wife, I will be your husband. In the Hebrew Bible, it is common to speak of marriage as taking a wife. God likened Himself to a suitor, and the people of Israel to the young woman He was courting. He was not content to simply redeem them from slavery. He wanted to take them as His very own people and enjoy an intimate relationship with them, like that of a husband to a wife. This is covenantal language. God wanted to enter into covenant with Israel. A covenant is a contractual arrangement that specifies the terms and conditions of a relationship. The marriage metaphor is a good way to understand the covenant at Sinai. The sages speak of Exodus 19 as God's betrothal of Israel. At the foot of Mount Sinai, God officially asked for Israel's hand in marriage. He spoke to her lovingly. He reminded the people of how He had carried them out of Egypt as if on the wings of an eagle, and how He had brought them to Himself. He promised to make them His own special treasure above all the other people. He said, you shall be my own possession, Exodus 19:5. The Hebrew word that the NASB translates as possession is the word segula. Some versions translate it as a beloved treasure, or a particular treasure. In an ancient Near East, the term segula referred to a king's prized trophy. When a king's army vanquished an enemy, the king kept the most valuable items for his own treasure. A precious object like this was called a segula. In Exodus 19:5, the Lord uses the word as a term of endearment for Israel. God says that He will make the Israelites into His specially prized treasure. He says that even though He owns the entire earth, Israel will always be His special people. Now this can be compared to a king who had conquered many lands and possessed great wealth. His treasuries were filled with valuables, but he had one precious gemstone that he valued above all others. Rather than leave it in a treasury with other valuables, he had it hung on a golden chain and wore it around his neck every day. That's the way God looks at Israel. The Jewish people are his treasured possession. On another level, a personal level, God treasures every human being who turns to him in faith and repentance as a trophy of his love. A kingdom of priests. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Exodus 19:6. The Lord promised to make the children of Israel into a kingdom of priests. The job of a priest is to serve as an intermediary and representative between the gods and human beings. As the priests of the ancient world approached the gods and worshipped, they represented the people by bringing sacrifices and oblations on their behalf. As they interacted with the people, they represented the gods in whose service they were priests. God designated the Jewish nation to act as an intermediaries in a similar way between him and the nations. They were entrusted with the oracles of God, Romans 3:2. To them belongs the adoption as sons and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the Torah and the temple service and the promises, whose are the fathers and from whom is the Messiah according to the flesh, Romans 9:4-5. Now the Apostle Peter encouraged the Jewish people living among the nations to live a godly lives, because they were now a part of the chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, and that's in 1 Peter 2:9. He warned them against bodily lusts and exhorted them to keep their behavior excellent among the Gentiles. That's 1 Peter 2:12. So that they would observe their good deeds and glorify God. Israel has the privilege of being God's special people, but they also have the responsibility to show and tell to the rest of the world who God really is. They are to be a perpetual witness and testimony of the one true God. A baptism before marriage. The Lord also said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." Exodus 19:10-11. Before a traditional Jewish wedding, it is customary for a bride and a groom to immerse themselves in baptism, which is called the mikvah. It is a purity ritual. Both bride and groom want to be ritually fit, pure on their wedding night. In Hebrew, the gathering of water suitable for ritual immersion is called a mikvah. A river, lake, or any other natural rain or spring-fed pool of water will do. In the Torah, the ritual baptizing oneself in mikvah is sometimes referred to as washing one's garments. Like a bride preparing for her wedding day, the people of Israel immersed themselves before meeting with God at Mount Sinai. The Holy King. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, "Beware that you do not go up to the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death." Exodus 19:12. As God prepared to descend upon Mount Sinai, he was concerned about the safety of the people. He warned them twice not to come too close to the mountain, to touch it, or try to ascend it. The warning seems harsh. Anyone who touched the mountain was to be put to death. Why would a loving God make such a harsh rule? The concern was a matter of holiness. God is dangerous in much the same way that lightning is dangerous. It is an awe-inspiring and beautiful, but if you get too close to it, it is deadly. In the biblical world, there is an understood axiom that no man can see God and live. His presence can be lethal. Mortal flesh cannot endure the manifest glory of the living God. In order for God to descend onto Mount Sinai, the mountain needed to be made holy, separate. People going up to the mountain, touching it, or ascending it would violate the holiness, separateness of the mountain. The boundaries and the limits that define the holy space were a necessary precaution not only to protect the sanctity of the holy precinct, but also to protect the people from consuming and devastating presence of God. By making the penalty for violation and the boundary of death sentence, God communicated the gravity of the danger to the people. The holiness of God is not well appreciated in today's world. Our modern assessment of God usually does not depict him as dangerous and unapproachable. And this is unfortunate. Only when we understand how unapproachable God is can we appreciate the value of being able to approach him in the name of Yeshua. This can be compared to a king who sat on the throne. Anyone who approached the king without first being summoned was sentenced to death. His son, however, could approach his father whenever he wanted, and he often brought his friends into the king's presence as well. The prince's friends became familiar with the king. When they were reminded of the law against approaching him unbidden, they said, "That sounds too harsh. Surely the king is not so harsh." The king reminded them, "You have known me as a father only because you are beloved on account of my son. Do not forget that I am also a king." Under the chuppah, Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Exodus 19:17. In traditional Jewish wedding, the bride and the groom are married beneath a canopy called a chuppah. I think we talked about it before. The word is used in several places in the Bible. For example, the prophet Joel says, "Let the bridegroom come out of his room and the bride out of her chuppah." Joel 2:16. And Psalm 19:5 speaks of the bridegroom coming out of his chuppah. The chuppah symbolizes the new house being formed by the union of bride and groom. Was there a chuppah at Mount Sinai? The cloud of glory over the mountain can be compared to a chuppah. A similar image appears in the prophecies of Isaiah, actually. Isaiah says that in the Messianic age, God will spread a canopy of cloud over Jerusalem. And it says this, "Then the Lord will create over the whole area of Mount Zion and over her assemblies a cloud by day, even smoke, and a brightness of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory will be a chuppah." Isaiah 4:5. Mount Sinai itself is sometimes likened to a chuppah. Exodus 19:17 says that the people stood beneath the mountain. This can be compared to a bride standing beneath the bridal canopy of the chuppah. One should not take a statement like this literally. It is intended to cement the image of the wedding at Mount Sinai in our minds. The ketubah. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Exodus 19:20. God descended onto Mount Sinai in the midst of smoke, lightning, and a fanfare of trumpet blasts. The mountain trembled before him. The writer of the book of Hebrews described it as a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and whirlwind. Hebrews 12:18. So terrible was the sight that Moses said, "I am full of fear and trembling." Hebrews 12:21. It was a great entrance of the groom into the chuppah. In a traditional Jewish wedding, a marriage contract is read aloud to the bride and the groom as part of the ceremony. The written contract is called the ketubah. The ketubah spells out the terms and conditions incumbent upon the man and the woman. After the ceremony, witnesses sign the ketubah. In the Jewish tradition, the ketubah is also displayed in the home as evidence that the marriage is legal. In the wedding at Mount Sinai, the Torah is the ketubah. It is the legally binding covenant contract between God and his bride, Israel. From atop Mount Sinai that day, God spoke the 10 Commandments to all Israel. This can be compared to the reading of the ketubah in a wedding ceremony. Similarly, according to Exodus 24:4, Moses will read the book of the covenant to the assembly of Israel. This is a different way of looking at the commandments of the Torah. We should not think of them as rules imposed by an impersonal government. They are more like the wedding vows joyfully taken by a blushing bride on her wedding day. If we understand the Torah as ketubah, we see that it is far more than an ethical system or a moral list of do's and don'ts. Instead, it functions as the sacred marriage covenant between God and His people. It lays out the parameters for the relationship and outlines the expectations. Its specific instructions and stipulations are designed to make the marriage happy, fruitful, and functional. It defines the obligations of both the husband and the wife and describes how they are to treat each other. To violate the ketubah is to violate the marriage. Following that metaphor, the prophets charged the nation of Israel with marital unfaithfulness whenever they violated the Torah. Like an ancient marriage counselor, the prophets rebuked the people in order to return them to their covenant vows. Now we'll talk about the Ten Commandments. Then God spoke all these words, saying, Exodus 21. The Ten Commandments are moral absolutes. They were spoken out loud by God, and everyone heard them, and they actually seen them. They require no further justification. For the Jewish people, they are non-negotiable. The Ten Commandments are well known. Even non-believers and the people from other religions are more or less familiar with the concept of the Ten Commandments. In the United States, political and social battles continue to be waged about whether or not it is appropriate to display the Ten Commandments on public property. The popular culture abounds with jokes about breaking the Ten Commandments, but most people reflexively accept their moral authority. In Hebrew, they are called the Aseret HaDevarim, which literally means the 10 words, but could more loosely be translated as 10 matters. But how are the 10 commandments to be divided into 10? In Judaism, the first commandment is reckoned to be the declaration, I am the Lord your God, Exodus 22. This is traditionally understood as a commandment to believe in God. The second commandment is to have no other gods. Therefore, the Jewish enumeration of the 10 commandments is as follows. We're going to list them. So, number 1, I am the Lord your God. Number 2, you shall have no other gods. Number 3, do not take the name in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath. Number 5, honor your father and mother. Number 6, you shall not murder. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness. Number 10, you shall not covet. In traditional Jewish ordering of the commandments, the first 4 commandments refer to our obligation towards God, and the last 6 refer to our obligation toward our fellow man. In the early 5th century, the Christian theologian Augustine of Hippo combined the first 2 commandments into one commandment. I'm not sure if you guys knew that. And split the prohibition on coveting into 2 commandments, one against coveting a neighbor's wife and one against coveting his property. Augustine's list became the standard enumeration for the Roman Church. And here is the 10 commandments in the Catholic, Lutheran, and Anglican tradition. So number 1, you shall have no other gods. Number 2, do not take the name in vain. The Sabbath goes to number 3, remember the Sabbath. Number 4, honor your father and mother. Number 5, you shall not murder. Number 6, you shall not commit adultery. Number 7, you shall not steal. Number 8, you shall not bear false witness. Number 9, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. Number 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's property. The Eastern Orthodox churches have followed a slight variation on the Jewish reckoning. Rather than regarding the statement, I am the Lord your God, Exodus 22, as a separate commandment, they list the first 2 commandments as prohibition on having other gods and prohibition on idols. The Greek reckoning is as follows. Number 1, you shall have no other gods. Number 2, do not make idols. Number 3, do not take the name in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath. Number 5, honor your father and mother. Number 6, you shall not murder. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness. Number 10, you shall not covet. The 10 Commandments were spoken out loud by God in Exodus 20, written in stone by his own finger, Exodus 31:18, and chiseled into the second set of stone tablets by Moses, Exodus 34:28. Moses repeats the 10 words to the assembly of Israel in Deuteronomy 5:6 through 21. Regardless of how they are numbered, the 10 Commandments continue to speak across the centuries. The voice from Sinai echoes even today in the lives of millions of people. In the commentary for this Torah portion, we will study the first 4 commandments. When the Torah repeats the list in Deuteronomy 5:6 to 21, we will study the remaining 6. So number 1, the suzerain and the CEO. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, Exodus 22. Obviously, there are a lot more commandments in the Torah than just these 10. According to tradition in Talmudic reckoning, there are a total of 613 commandments in the Torah. So it's basically these 10 commandments go into those 613. The 10 commandments almost like a heading, but the total is 613. It depends on how you count them. At any rate, there are certainly more than 10. And I think the breakdown of them would be 365 negative commandments, as in you cannot do, and 248 positive commandments, as in you must do. And the total is 613. So why are these 10 singled out? The 10 commandments are like an ethical core from which the rest of the commandments radiate. In some ways, they summarize the rest of the commandments. In other ways, they form the foundation for the rest of the commandments. It is not as if they're the only important commandments and the rest are optional. In the days of the apostles, the 10 commandments were recited as part of the morning prayers. According to the Talmud, the practice changed when certain sectarians began to teach that the 10 commandments were the only commandments still valid. In order to discourage this misunderstanding from spreading, the sages elected to remove the recitation of the 10 commandments from the morning prayers. The sectarians who argued that the only 10 commandments were still valid may have been early Christians. In the church today, it is common to hear people defend the 10 commandments as binding and eternal laws, but in the next breath claim that the rest of the commandments of the Torah need no longer be practiced. The 10 commandments were never meant to be regarded as a shorter, easier version of the Torah. Nor is there any indication in the Bible that the 10 commandments endure while the rest of the laws are done away with. The 10 commandments are better understood as the essence of the entire revelation of the Torah. They are the nucleus of the covenant treaty, similar to the other suzerainty covenants of the ancient Near East. A suzerain is a nation or a political entity that controls a dependent nation's international affairs but allows it to retain sovereignty over many of its internal affairs. Now, some aspects of ancient Near Eastern suzerainty treaties are useful for understanding the Torah and the covenantal relationship between God and Israel. By means of suzerainty covenant, a great king would form a political alliance with a vassal nation. The covenant document between them typically began with a preamble identifying the covenant suzerain and a brief historical prologue, which recounted the benefits bestowed upon the vassal by the suzerain. Exodus 22, the first of the 10 commandments, follows this pattern. Preamble: I am the Lord your God. Historical prologue: who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery? So according to the Jewish reckoning, Exodus 22 is the first commandment. When understood as the preamble to a suzerainty treaty, this commandment has covenant implications. Not only is it a commandment to acknowledge that God exists, it is also a commandment to acknowledge that He is your God and you are His vassal. Therefore, the first commandment establishes the authority on which the subsequent commandments rest. This can be compared to a CEO who was visiting a small branch office. The employees did not recognize the stranger. He walked into the office and gave them assignments, but no one listened until he said, "I am the CEO, your boss, who authorizes you to receive a paycheck." When employees understood who he was, they immediately accepted his orders. The rest of the Ten Commandments form the baseline stipulations of the treaty. This is why they were later written on 2 stone tablets, which refer to as the testimony. In the ancient Near East, suzerainty covenants were written out and deposited in a safe place. The 2 tablets are duplicate copies of the treaty. Just as a modern contract is always written in a duplicate so that each party can retain a copy, the 10 Commandments were written on 2 tablets, one representing God's copy and the other representing the Israel's copy. Therefore, the 10 Commandments should be understood as the legal core for the entire covenant of Torah, not the sum total of it. Number 2, the jealous God. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the 3rd and the 4th generations of those who hate me. Exodus 25. As noted above, there are different opinions as to what constitutes the first commandment. The Jewish tradition maintains that the first commandment is the commandment to believe in God. The Christian tradition has the first commandment as the prohibition of worshiping other gods. The Eastern Orthodox reckoning agrees that the second commandment is a prohibition on idols. All of these commandments fall under the category of a monotheistic and iconoclast mandate. They are meant to teach us to worship God alone and not to make representations of Him or any other gods. God explains these commandments by saying, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Exodus 25. So does this mean that God is jealous in a sense of a petty, selfish jealousy that takes offense when attention and affection are directed anywhere else? Of course not. God is jealous in a sense that a loving husband is jealous over his wife. If your spouse told you, I don't care whether you see other people, it doesn't bother me, you would be alarmed that he or she no longer holds your wedding vows as sacrosanct. It would bother you that your spouse had such little affection for you that infidelity was not even an issue. It would be a clear and certain sign that your spouse cared little for you or for your relationship. The Hebrew word for jealousy is kana. It also translated as zeal. The term jealous God could be translated as zealous God, or even impassioned God. God is passionately in love with his people. He is like a steadfast and faithful husband who does not waver in his affection or commitment to his bride. Because of that, he will not tolerate the worship of other gods, nor will he allow for the worship of idols. He feels the same way about idolatry and paganism that a faithful husband would feel about his wife having an affair. God's fidelity should encourage us to adopt the same standard of jealous devotion to Him. Just as a faithful and steadfast wife would shun the affections of other men and refuse their flirtatious gifts and suggestive advances, we should be resolved to give no room to idolatry and paganism in our lives. God is passionately in love with us. We should return that passion. Number 3, emptying God's name. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Exodus 27. The third commandment forbids taking God's name in vain. To take something in vain means to empty it of meaning. On a simple level, invoking God's name in a curse empties his name of meaning. For example, a person might stub his toe on a cast iron radiator and exclaim, God damn it. Or in our world today, everybody uses Jesus this, Jesus that in the same context. In reality, he has no real intention of invoking a curse upon the radiator, whereby its cast iron frame would be eternally sentenced to burn in the fires of perdition by the authority of the Almighty. In reality, the person means nothing at all, and as such, he has misused God's name and emptied it of meaning. However, the prohibition on misusing God's name has a more legally binding sense as well. It was probably originally intended as a prohibition on using God's name to swear falsely. If one tells a lie and uses God's name to try to buttress his lie, he is using God's name in vain. For this sin, the Torah says the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Exodus 27. According to Yeshua, a person does not necessarily have to speak God's name to misuse it in a false oath. A person might swear by heaven, by Jerusalem, the temple, the altar, or even the sacrifice on the altar, but he is still swearing by God's reputation. In our modern culture, when we swear on the Bible in a court of law, this is the same as swearing in God's name. To perjure oneself after making such an oath would be a matter of misusing the name. Another way to misuse God's name is to use it idly. In Judaism, the prohibition of misusing God's name is taken so seriously that his actual Hebrew name is never pronounced, as it's spelled YHVH. And I have sometimes argued with people who insist on pronouncing God's name. More than once, I have warned friends, saying, if you insist on pronouncing his name and using it casually, you will eventually profane it. Invariably, they end up using God's name for their email addresses, a clever slogan on their t-shirts, and even written out in Hebrew on their hats. By reducing God's name to a household word or treating it like a brand name of a soft drink or a ball team, we empty it of meaning. To profane something means to take something that is meant to be holy and to treat it as if it were ordinary. Now, when I was a child, my father would not even allow us to use the words like heck, darn, gosh, golly, or jeepers because they were obviously polite versions of profanity. How much more so should we be circumspect about keeping God's pronounced Hebrew name holy? And another good example of it would be your father. Each one of us had or have a father. We never call our father by his real name. We say father, dad, daddy. If we were to call him by his real name, it would be disrespectful towards him. So think about God. Who are we to call him by his real name? The holiness, his holiness will not can come close to us. Like we are nobody that can use that name so plainly to call him by his real name. And same with the people who use their real name and put it on their t-shirts, hats, and everything else. Sooner or later, that piece of clothing or that hat gets old and gets worn out and gets thrown out. So now you're literally throwing away a piece of clothing in the garbage or trash that has God's written name on it. So think about these things. It's a very important point that everybody should know. And we'll move on to number 4, which is God's day. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Exodus 28. And the first commandment is the commandment of the Sabbath day. In a Christian interpretation, this commandment is sometimes understood to apply to Sunday, which is totally wrong, but we'll talk about it some other time. The Christian Sabbath, but the 2nd and 3rd century church fathers never made that leap actually. They kept Sundays as the Lord's Day, but they still regarded Saturday as the Sabbath. Even if they did not observe it themselves, Martin Luther also took a hard stand against regarding Sunday as the Sabbath. He was against any Christian keeping any day as the Sabbath, be it Sunday, Saturday, or any day of the week. Believers who still keep the 7th-day biblical Sabbath are called Sabbatarians in Christianity. Different sects of Sabbatarians have existed throughout most of the Christian history. But in the days of the apostles, all the believers were Sabbatarian. There was no other day of worship. Let's take a careful look at the Sabbath commandment. Remember the Sabbath day, Exodus 28. The Lord commands Israel to remember the Sabbath. What does it mean to remember the Sabbath? Was there ever a danger of forgetting to keep the Sabbath? In Semitic culture, the word remember has a clear covenant connotations. To remember means to act in faithfulness to the covenant. Similarly, God remembered Noah in the ark, if you guys remember that. And he remembered Sarah when he was ready to open her womb. Therefore, God is telling Israel to show faithfulness to his covenant by keeping the Sabbath. Rashi says that we should remember the Sabbath all week long by preparing for it. For example, he says that if a person comes across a nice article of food or drink during the week, he should set it aside for Sabbath. This reminds me of the story from the days of the Master. When the Master was a baby, there lived a sage by the name of Shammai. I'm pretty sure most of you guys know of Shammai and Hillel. Whenever Shammai was in the marketplace, he always kept a lookout for exceptionally fine items that he might be able to purchase for the Sabbath. If he found a really good goat or chicken or vintage of wine, he would purchase it and say, "This is for the Shabbat." If later in the week he found even a nicer, he would purchase that one for the Sabbath and use the previous thing he had bought on a weekday instead. So sometimes I meet Christians who want to keep the Sabbath, but they're distressed because in their current circumstances they cannot. They wonder, what should they do? For example, it is not uncommon for a married woman to want to keep the Sabbath when her husband does not. In such situations, I remind people that God commanded the Jewish people to both remember the Sabbath and observe the Sabbath. If it is possible to do both, it is good to do one of them. Not everyone can be a Sabbatarian, but if you are unable to observe the Sabbath, you can at least remember it. At the minimum, this requires being conscious of the Sabbath's presence. Remember it on Friday night when the sun goes down and the Sabbath begins. Remember it on the Saturday morning when the sun rises on the day of rest and the Torah is being read in synagogues. Remember it on Saturday night as the holy day comes to an end. By doing that much, a person can take a small share in the Sabbath. The path of Torah is never all or nothing, and something is always better than nothing. Keep it holy. Remember Sabbath day to keep it holy, Exodus 28. The Lord commands us to keep the Sabbath day holy. Holy means separate for the Lord, but that holiness can look different to different people. Now, this is a story of our friend. When he was first considering becoming a Sabbatarian, he discussed the matter with his father. He encouraged him to follow God's leading on that matter, but he warned him about making the experience unpleasant for his children. When he was a boy, his church regarded Sunday as the Sabbath day. Sunday was the holy day. For his father and his brothers, this meant dressing in stiff, uncomfortable clothing, sitting quietly in church. Then they'd return home and sat in the living room and listened while the adults talked. They were not allowed to play, read anything except the Bible, or engage in any activities other than sitting still through that long and dreadful day of holiness. In Jewish tradition, the Sabbath is supposed to be a day of delight. There is still the formal clothing part, and the sitting through the long synagogue services, but the atmosphere of the day is one of the celebration and joy rather than austere and solemn pity. 3 festive meals, generous beverages, special guests, surprise visit to friends' houses, and an eager delight in the Word of God combine to make the Sabbath a time of special happiness. It is a day of song and good cheer. Now, in regards to our friend, his wife and him made efforts to make the Sabbath fun for their children when they were little. The best foods came out on Sabbath. His wife used to keep a bag of treats she called the Sabbath bag. The kids could choose a treat from the Sabbath bag while they sat at the table with them. They read the stories, and His wife made sure that the kids had appropriate reading material for the Sabbath days. They played games, went on family walks, and generally had a good time. None of the children ever dreaded the Sabbath. By unanimous consent, it was always their favorite day of the week. And that's very important. It is a special day where in this day we should make it all about God firstly, then our family, the nature and His creation. It has such big benefit to keep the Sabbath. It is like the blessing which will unleash on you and your family if you keep it. You keep this commandment, a blessing unleashes. You keep that commandment, a blessing unleashes. But the Sabbath, it suppresses all of them. And it's even for the people who are not religious per se, just following that pattern of 6 days a week, you work, and you do all these things you have to do, but the seventh day you just rest. You rest and you spend it in peace. You try to get to know God. You try to spend time with your family, and that itself can transform, and it will transform people. I'm not sure if you guys heard, well, all of you knows Charlie Kirk that's been assassinated, and before his death, he wrote a book, actually, how to keep the Sabbath and how much blessing a person would inherit by doing so. And Charlie always preached to all the Christians to keep the Sabbath Saturday, and how much it has transformed his life and his family's lives. So if you guys are interested, for the Christians, you can look up that book and read it. It's a very good read. And we'll talk about the weekly grind. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Exodus 29. In order to truly enter the spirit of Sabbath, a person has to work the other 6 days of the week. The American 2-day weekend is a religious innovation designed for the convenience of both Sabbath observance and Sunday observance. Have you guys ever thought about it or researched it? It's pretty interesting how it all came to be. And in Israel, Sunday morning is like any other workday except in Christian quarters. Rush hour starts on Sunday morning. This does not mean that you have to go to your job 6 days a week. The word for work is melacha. It's much broader than simply making a living. It means any kind of creative activity or production. Even knitting or needlepoint are forms of work, melacha, in the Sabbath sense. Rashi says that the commandment 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, Exodus 29, could be read as 6 days you shall labor and then all your work will be finished. So according to his explanation, when the Sabbath comes, a person should regard it as though he had completed every task he had to do, so that he does not spend the Sabbath day fretting about work and responsibilities. And I guess that's where, the tradition came that we do not talk about work, we do not think about work, and we do not perform work. The seventh day. So the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God, Exodus 20:10. The Sabbath is the seventh day of the week. A person might suppose that it does not matter which day of the week he sets aside for the Lord, so long as he sets a day apart. For example, Tuesday might be convenient. While this is in keeping with the principle of Sabbath observance, it is not actually keeping the Sabbath. Only the seventh day is the Sabbath. I have often had people ask me how we know which day the seventh day is. After all, the Torah was given 3,400 years ago. Isn't it fairly likely that we have lost the track of which day of the week the seventh day actually falls on? If the Jewish people had any doubt about which day of the week was the seventh day, the miracle of the manna made it obvious. Manna did not fall on the seventh day. The Jewish people have been in continual existence as a nation since they left Egypt. It is possible that you or I might wake up one morning and not remember which day of the week it is. I'm often in the habit of forgetting whether it's Wednesday or Thursday. It has never happened, however, that my entire family had simultaneously forgotten which day of the week it was. how much less likely that an entire nation of the people could have simultaneously lost track of which day of the week it was. For disciples of Yeshua, determining the Sabbath day requires even less of a reach back throughout history. We do not have to rely on tradition carried all the way from Mount Sinai. We know that our teacher and master, Yeshua, honored the same seventh day as Sabbath that the rest of Judaism did. Since his era, Judaism has certainly never skipped a day or lost track of the days of the week. A continuous chain of corporate testimony stretches from our day and age all the way back to the days of Yeshua and even back to Mount Sinai. We know which day is the seventh day because after all these years, the Jewish people are still keeping it. Work. In it you shall not do any work. Exodus 20:10. So on the Sabbath, the Jewish people are not supposed to be working, as well as any other people or nation or person who decides to keep the Sabbath. Now, in regards to our friends, his father was not a Sabbath keeper. He kept Sunday as the Lord's day, but he did not feel particularly bound to keep it as a Sabbath. Nevertheless, out of respect for others, he never went to work on Sundays. And our friend always remembered him saying that, I would like to go out and mow the lawn, but I don't want to give the neighbors the occasion of saying, look at that, the pastor is working on Sunday. What is work? As mentioned above, the biblical Hebrew word is melacha. Melacha means production and creation. The original work from which God rested when the Sabbath was instituted was that of creation, shaping, creating, forming, making, ordering, structuring, organizing, mixing, and molding things to produce results. So that's what actually God rested from. When God rested on Sabbath day, he was resting from imposing his will onto substance. He rested from producing. That gives us a better picture of what work is in the Sabbath sense. It also explains why Exodus 16:23 forbids cooking, boiling, and baking on Sabbath. Those things involve making food. That is why in Judaism and Messianic Judaism we cook food before Sabbath, not on Sabbath. So on the Sabbath we can warm it up, but we never cook on Sabbath. So on Shabbat we are to rest from making. We rest from imposing our will. We rest from restructuring, reordering, and creating things. In his book, The Sabbath, the Jewish philosopher Abraham Joshua Heskel writes about the Sabbath rest as follows. 6 days a week we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. On the Sabbath, we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in our soul. The world has our hands, but our soul belongs to someone else. And let's talk about Sabbath for Gentiles. You or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. Exodus 20:10. God gave the Sabbath as a special gift and a sign to the Jewish people. But the Sabbath should also be enjoyed by Gentile believers who believe in God of Israel. The Torah specifically says that even the sojourner who stays with Israel is granted rest on Sabbath. The word sojourner is one of the Torah's words for non-Jews. This means that even the Gentile within the people of Israel were to keep the Sabbath. Isaiah the prophet says that Sabbath is also for the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord to minister to him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, everyone who keeps from profaning the Sabbath. Isaiah 56:6. The passage says that a Gentile who keeps God's Sabbath and holds fast to his covenant will be rewarded along with the people of Israel. And you can also find the same verse in Hebrews, where it says all the people of God should be keeping the Sabbath. Blessed and holy. In 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Exodus 20:11. The Sabbath is unique because God has blessed it and declared it holy. By keeping the Sabbath, we are able to enter into that special blessing and holiness that God bestowed upon the Sabbath day. If the covenant ceremony at Mount Sinai can be compared to a wedding, the Sabbath can be compared to a wonderful wedding gift, wrapped up in blessing and holiness. It is a gift that continues to radiate the love of God every week. In his book, The Sabbath, the Jewish philosopher Abraham Joshua Heschel writes about the Sabbath as a sanctuary in time. Just as there are holy places in the world that we might regard as sanctuaries in space, the Sabbath is a holy day and it creates a sanctuary in time. The Sabbath is a day for enjoying holiness and blessing. On the Sabbath, we are relieved of the burdens of the secular work week. We spend extra time in prayer and study. Since ancient times, the Torah has been read in synagogue every Sabbath. The Gospel tells us that it was Yeshua's custom to attend synagogue and read from the Torah on the Sabbath day. He also used the Sabbath as a day for healing those with infirmities. His disciples were Sabbath keepers. In the days of the apostles, all believers were Sabbath keepers because the Sabbath was the weekly day of worship. Even the early Christians were Sabbath keepers until the Roman emperor officially changed the Sabbath day from Saturday to Sunday. And now I want you to really ask yourself this. Does a man have the authority to change God's holy day to a different day? And today the Sabbath beacons the disciples of Yeshua to return and enter into her sanctuary of blessing and holiness. And that's about it for today. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope that this message blessed you and you learned a lot about the Sabbath, and I do encourage you to try keeping it, at least some things, and you will see how much blessing and how much meaning this will, be to you and your family. And please like the video, subscribe to us. It does help a lot for the message to reach more people who need encouragement and truth. And feel free to follow our Instagram, linked in the comments, for daily inspiration as well as daily prayers. May God bless you and keep you. May He shine His light on you and be gracious to you. May He turn towards you and grant you peace. Grace and shalom to you all.